about, actually this is more of a review than anything, that will help you with future units in anatomy, because we're going to actually start talking about the systems when we're done with this unit, which is a review of some cell parts, not all the cell parts, and then some of the tissue types. So it depends on who you have for biology, whether you've heard about the tissues or not, but I'm going to walk you through these, and then you have a little project you're going to do with them. So let's get started. Now, these chapters are not the chapters that are in the OpenStax book. I'll provide you with the appropriate chapters in the instruction sheet for the project when we get to that. All right, so let's look at a few basic cell components that you need to kind of know for anatomy. And again, you guys have already gone over this stuff in biology a long time ago, and we mentioned a little bit about the cell membrane when we did the phospholipids, or the lipid section of the chemistry unit. Anyway, you know the cell membrane is going to regulate what comes into and leaves the cell. It controls all the raw materials that are coming into the cell, and those raw materials are used to build things like proteins and other substances, but then it also allows the waste products to leave the cell as well. If they don't leave the cell, they become toxic, and if they become toxic, it'll kill the cell and eventually kill you. So this is a homeostatic structure that's going to help keep things moving in that need to go in and get the bad stuff out. All right, mitochondria is something else that I mentioned in the organic chemistry section when we were talking about cell respiration, because I said that all your cells need energy in order to function, and we said that ATP had to be made. So this is where the energy is made using the glucose and the oxygen. Okay, you have the Golgi body, sometimes called the Golgi apparatus, or even the Golgi complex. But if you see the word Golgi, it's the same thing, and this is, and they're like little containers for any products that are secreted, so they're contained inside of that, so they can be moved around the cell, and then they are able to leave the cell as well through these containers called vesicles. So things that could be moved out are hormones, enzymes, lipids. That's just to name a few. You have peroxisomes. These are also little like vesicles, but their function is to break down hydrogen peroxide. Now you think hydrogen peroxide, that's that stuff in my medicine cabinet in the little brown bottle. What does that have to do with anything? Well, believe it or not, H2O2, which is hydrogen peroxide, looks a lot like water, but it's got the extra oxygen. So when you get the extra oxygen attached, it actually becomes a toxic substance. So this is one of your metabolism's waste products. And it's one of the things that your body has to get rid of, because if it's allowed to build up, it will kill you. So see the little chemical reaction at the bottom of the page? You've got hydrogen peroxide, and then this word here, this is catalase. That is a special little enzyme, which we got up here, that's found inside of these peroxisomes. And what this enzyme does is it speeds up the reaction that breaks down hydrogen peroxide into water and oxygen. Okay, so once you break it down into water and oxygen, it's fine. It's just we have to get it out of that hydrogen peroxide state. Otherwise, it is toxic. All right, you have villi and microvilli. These are found in the small intestines. They're really just little finger-like projections that stick out on the surface. They almost look like a shag carpet, but their purpose is to increase the surface area inside the intestines, which is going to help with your nutrients being absorbed. We'll talk more about these when we get to the digestive system. Cilia are tiny little short hair-like structures that are going to wave back and forth, and they help with the movement of substances. You can find these in females along their fallopian or uterine tubes. So when the egg is ovulated each month from the ovary, these little cilia help to sweep it down the fallopian tubes and into the uterus. You also have some of this in your respiratory tract, so it helps to keep like dust and debris from getting into your lungs by sweeping it back out in the opposite direction. All right, so those are the cell parts. Now, the second part, again, this is chapter 4, but I don't think that's a chapter in the OpenStax book. Again, I'll give you the appropriate pages and stuff in the OpenStax book when I give you the project to do. Anyway, these are the four main types of tissues found in the body. We will talk about these different types of tissues throughout all the other chapters. So as we walk through the systems chapters, these will pop up. All right, so we'll start with epithelial tissue. That's the first type. It has several functions, from protecting the underlying structures. It acts as a barrier to keep things out. It allows certain things in. It secretes substances, and it can absorb things. So, for example, in the intestines, it lines the intestines so it allows your body to absorb the nutrients from the food. Secreting substances, if you think about your skin is made of epithelial tissue, so sweat or oil is secreted. Okay, so these epithelial tissues are classified and named based on two characteristics. The first characteristic is the shape of the cell, and the second one is how many layers of cells there are. And this is usually how they're named. So you start with the layer name followed by the cell shape. So anyway, you have three cell shapes. You have flat ones that are called squamous, square ones that are called cuboidal, because they're cube-shaped, and then you have rectangular cells, which are called columnar, because they look like columns. All right, and then when you look at the cell layers, you have simple, which means one layer of cells, or stratified, which means multiple layers of cells. So down here you can see pictures. This is simple columnar because they're column-shaped cells. This is stratified because you have multiple layers, and actually you have a couple different cell shapes in here. The very top has the squamous flat cells, and then you get down here and you have the cuboidal. All right, you have other types of epithelial tissue as well that don't quite fit into those groups. One's called pseudostratified. If you remember, the prefix pseudo means false. And again, we said stratified means many layers. So this one appears to be stratified, but it's really only one layer. It's kind of the way all the cells are jammed up together. It almost looks like there's several layers, but there's not. So these are found in the respiratory tract. They produce mucus. And then you have one called transitional, and that means it starts out as one shape and turns into another because the organ that's its lining is actually stretched. So if you think about the uterus in a female when she's pregnant, it's lined with transitional epithelial, so it starts out as squares, but as that baby grows and that uterus is stretched out, they get flat. And the same thing happens in your urinary bladder. Okay, as the urine builds up in your bladder and you have to pee, it starts out when it's empty as little square cells, but then as it stretches out, they get thin. Think of a rubber band stretching and how it thins out. That's transitional. All right, our second main type of connective tissue. So that was epithelial we just did. Now we have connective. Connective has several functions as well. They enclose and separate things in the body. They connect tissues together. They help with support and movement, storage, cushioning and insulation, helps with transporting things around, and then your immunity. Now, for example, storage. Think about your bones, they store calcium. Cushioning and insulation, fat is another type of connective tissue. Transportation or transport, that would be your blood. Your blood is a type of connective tissue. And immunity, if you think about the white blood cells themselves, that's connective tissue as well. Connecting tissues together, if you think about ligaments and tendons, the tendons hold muscle to muscle, and the tendons hold muscle to bone, and the ligaments hold bone to bone. So they're holding things together. And then, of course, support movement, that's your bones. All right, so how do we classify connective tissue? Connective tissue is classified about how densely packed the cells are. So how close together are the cells? They can be loose if there's a lot of space between the cells, like in fat cells or blood. And blood is pretty much the loosest connective tissue you can get because it's pretty much in a liquid matrix. So, but they can be as dense as bone, which means the cells are highly packed together. Okay, so it's just depending on how densely packed the cells are. All right, some examples. You have bone and cartilage. You have tendons, which attach muscle to bone. You have ligaments that connect bone to bone. They also make up the vocal cords. So those are just some examples of where you would see this in the body. Also, fat cells. are filled with lipid. These are loose connective tissues, also called adipose. So remember that word. That'll come back up from time to time. And then again, blood, which is the only liquid loose connective tissue. All right, third type of tissue found in the body is muscular tissue. So of course, its main function is movement. So it can be voluntary movement or involuntary movement. You see, I got one of my favorite guys right here. If you remember that from the first day of school. All right, so how is muscle tissue classified? It is classified based on the cell shape, where it's located in the body, and the type of movement, whether it's voluntary or involuntary. Now, we'll get into more specifics on this when we get to the muscle chapter, but right now that's all you need to know. We're not going to get into the specifics yet. Just know that the three types are skeletal, smooth, and cardiac, where skeletal is attached to the skeleton, smooth is lining the organs, and cardiac, of course, is the heart. All right, nervous tissue is our last main type of tissue in the body, and its main function is for communication within the body, so the brain telling the body parts what to do, what they need to do, controlling bodily functions and processing those electrical impulses so that we can communicate. Remember the negative feedback stuff we talked about and how the control center was the brain and how it'll tell the effector organ what to do in order to maintain homeostasis. So that's all part of it. How is the nervous system classified? Well, some of the cells conduct electrical impulses and they talk to other cells, but some of them do not. So that is how they are classified. So the ones that do conduct the electrical impulses to communicate throughout the body are called neurons, which are just a fancy name for nerve cells. And then you have something called neuroglia, and those are cells that do not conduct any electrical impulses. Their only purpose is really to nourish and support those nerve cells. Okay, and then there's kind of a picture down here of at least the top part of a neuron. We'll look at neurons in more detail too when we get to the nervous system chapter, and y'all will learn the parts. But all right, so those are the four main types of tissues that you'll find in the body. Okay, so if you have any questions, guys, you know where to find me.